HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Club, How the English Premier League Became the Wildest, Richest, Most Disruptive Force in Sports, by Joshua Robinson and Jonathan Clegg. Read by Shaun Grindell. Author's Note: On a recent morning, amid the daily hullabaloo at London's busiest transit hub, the commuters at Waterloo Station went about their underground rituals, demonstrating some of the vital skills of living in their city. How to carry a smartphone and a cup of tea in the same hand. How to open an umbrella without causing a public safety emergency. And how to absolutely, positively, never, ever make eye contact with anyone else. And down by the newsstand, near the escalators, the dozens who stopped to pick up their daily newspapers showcased one very particular everyday skill essential to British life: how to read a tabloid. Like almost everything else in this country, it turns out there's a right and a wrong way to do that. The page numbers are merely a suggestion. The right way starts with a glance at the headline pun on the front and an obligatory sigh for the state of humanity. Situation normal, all is not good. But these Londoners didn't stop to read on. They knew what they were doing. Without batting an eye, they took a quick sip of tea and flipped the entire paper over to find the news that really mattered. Starting from the back, over dozens of pages, almost 1/3 of the entire newspaper in some cases, they found stories dripping with urgency, intrigue, outrage, and absurd amounts of cash. A breathless global pursuit of billions of dollars, driven by an ensemble of outsized talent and ego, the stake of which, readers are assured, are nothing less than the fates of cities, regions, and nations. This was the stuff they really needed to start their days. The latest from the English Premier League. From West London, where a Russian oligarch keeps his club in a state of permanent revolution, to North London, where warring factions are locked in a spiral of endless one-upmanship, to Manchester, the country's old industrial hub, where a sudden and dramatic power shift is rewiring the dynamic between two ancient institutions. Caught in the gears between these empires are the smaller teams in market towns and mining counties, where soccer is the only thing that keeps them from falling off the map. And this whole world is constantly animated by oligarchs, sheikhs, American tycoons, Asian tiger titans, and a bunch of high school dropouts who have been millionaires since their teens because of their skill with a ball at their feet. All of which combines for a pretty full day of reading. More than enough Premier League excitement to compete with the stuff in the front of the papers about the latest parliamentary crisis and all that. Far beyond the morning scramble at Waterloo Station, the speculation and vague nuggets of truth contained in the red tops also powers an international rumour mill that, on a daily basis, captivates a dizzying number of fans around the world, reaching over to the other side of the Atlantic, clear through Asia and all across Africa, with a few researchers in Antarctica probably keeping tabs on it all too. The rise of the English Premier League is a story about the sports world's wildest gold rush. In the span of 25 years, the league's 20 clubs have increased their combined value by 10,000%, from around $100 million in 1992 to $15 billion today. During that time, the league has also exported its product to every corner of the planet. How this happened is a tale of how the country that invented the world's favorite game reinvented it, and how a handful of secret meetings in 1992 spawned a crazy quarter century in which money, ambition, and uncommon drama turned an ancient league into the most obsessively followed sports product on planet Earth. The story of how English football took over the world is a business and entertainment saga for the global age. It's a familiar one, at that it begins with a bright idea. What follows is a period of supercharged growth and frothy ambition, which leads to thrilling highs and unimagined riches. If you know anything about the dot-com boom or subprime mortgages, you know where this is heading. The cracks start to appear. Lured by outlandish valuations, investors from far-off places pitch up to grab a slice of the action. Competitors emerge. Short-termism replaces sound judgment, and pretty soon the whole enterprise is degenerated into a tawdry mixture of peacock egos, pathological greed, and shocking profligacy. The Premier League is a timeless tale of boom and bust, no different from all those other bubbles they warn you about in business school textbooks, except, that is, in one crucial respect. In football, the bubble never burst. As any British train station newsstand will prove, here and now in the twilight of the newspaper era, one rule seems to be enough to keep no fewer than 9 national dailies in business. There is no such thing as too many soccer pages. On any given morning, those 9 newspapers will generate roughly 100 pages of copy on the Premier League between them, and that's only in print media. Britain's fanatical coverage of its most popular product this side of the sandwich also buttresses 24-hour sports news channels and fills the airwaves 24/7, 365 days a year, even in the off-season. And that's only in Britain. Considering the fact that the Premier League is chronicled in such minute, neurotic detail every day of its existence, the idea of a complete history would be both impossible and laughable. It would be like trying to chronicle the ins and outs of stock market fluctuations over a period of 25 years. A lot of numbers, a lot of lunatics in pinstriped suits, and not at all fun to read. But there is one aspect of English soccer's modern history that hasn't quite been unpacked. The inside story of how the Premier League became the Premier League Inc. Not just a football product, but the global sports, business, and entertainment behemoth it is today. This is the story we want to tell. English soccer didn't begin in 1992, but that year, which marked the foundation of the Premier League, became the sport's BC AD milestone, the defining moment when nothing would be recorded the same way again. So how to tell the crazy story of everything that's happened since? We started, unwittingly, by living through it. We were both raised in the UK in the 1980s, 1990s, and 2000s, the same period when English soccer transformed from a hyper-local community activity into a worldwide entertainment monster. Robinson, who is half French, fell for the Gallic charms of Arsène Wenger's Arsenal and has yet to recover. Clegg, who grew up in Essex, succumbed to the more roguish qualities of Harry Redknapp's West Ham. Our contrasting soccer afflictions independently led us to the same career as sports writers. And as we obsessively followed the Premier League's rise, something else was unfolding 3,500 miles from any English soccer stadium that would transform the league's global reach. America started paying attention. Our coverage, informed by soccer conversations on both sides of the Atlantic, led to our charting an impressionistic, episodic history of the major inflection points in the league's history. Right in front of us was an impossible-not-to-tell version of the Premier League's first 25 years. You couldn't talk about the founding of the league in 1992, for instance, without telling the story of Rupert Murdoch, Sky TV, and a dramatic breakaway by a handful of English club owners who had the radical idea of making money from soccer. And you couldn't track the league's explosive commercial growth without digging into those owners' secret obsessions with the NFL, while English soccer's weaponized merchandising and money-spinning brilliance had to be traced back to Manchester United's marketing revolution. There was also the confluence of stadium tragedies, fan behaviour, and economic factors that turned the match-going experience upside down and led to the construction of Arsenal's Emirates Stadium, the first of the Premier League's modern monuments to its own success. And all of that simply laid the table for foreign money to pour in, with 2 owners in particular irreparably altering the landscape. Russia's Roman Abramovich, who bought Chelsea in 2003, and a member of the royal family of Abu Dhabi, who acquired Manchester City 5 years later. In between them, of course, also came the invasion of American owners, who learned the hard way that doing business in the cutthroat Premier League is nothing like running a hedge fund back home. Any of those turning points could fill volumes by themselves, but take them collectively, and the arc of the whole league emerges, from deeply parochial cultural concern to global phenomenon. This book is not an exhaustive history of English football. This book is not about who won the league when, or a catalogue of the greatest moments on grass. This is a tale of empire building. In our telling, there are a collection of inflection points that have, in turn, set off subsequent successive waves in the Premier League's global conquest. And the book is organized around those moments, using each one to bring to life the characters who made them happen, and probe the history, culture, and commerce that has accelerated the league's growth, or, at times, has stood in desperate resistance to it. For more than 100 years in towns across England and Wales, football supporters have turned out to champion their local teams. These aren't franchises in a league in any American sense. These are deeply ingrained territorial and regional markers to the English, more like Americans' emotional bond to college football, rather than the crass flash of the NFL. No English club ever moves. They are too rooted in their communities, and if they ever die, it's basically of old age or financial ruin. But when the top division of English football became the Premier League, and as the deals blossomed and the money started to flow in, more foreign players started to follow that money to England. More foreign managers came across the channel with less rugged, more refined styles. Bigger stadiums shot up, and with them, so did the ticket prices, putting a financial and emotional hurt on even the most committed of supporters. So this is the story of how the Premier League built one of the great global entertainment empires of our era, how it sustained its astonishing growth, and what it's willing to give up to keep ploughing ahead. Beyond our own attachment to the league, this book grew out of a combined decade of covering the English Premier League for the Wall Street Journal. Clegg became the journal's first European sports correspondent in 2009, and was succeeded by Robinson, who returned to Britain in 2012 after 9 years in the United States. Clegg went on to edit the paper's soccer coverage from New York, and Robinson is still in London and press boxes around the UK. Having followed the Premier League our entire lives, we were now in a position to tell its stories firsthand. And because we have covered all the major US sports, we were also practiced at translating it for American audiences. That said, we have chosen to recount this one in the language of English soccer. That means we have referred to clubs by the plural, as the British do, employed the terms football and soccer interchangeably, without venturing into that tiresome debate, and stuck to the names people actually use when talking about their teams. For instance, Manchester United or Man United, not the Red Devils. In order to wrap our arms around a story of this size, and tell it through original reporting rather than combing through newspaper archives, we did the only reasonable thing, and started at the beginning. The clandestine meetings that created the Premier League, and the people who were in the room. The key players in those days were Arsenal Vice-Chairman David Dein, Manchester United Chairman Martin Edwards, and Tottenham Hotspur owner Irving Scholar. After speaking to that trio, we sat down with nearly 100 other key figures from across the league's history, gaining unprecedented access, and for the first time in any retelling, we were able to secure rare interviews with decision-makers and executives from each of the so-called Big Six clubs: Manchester City, Manchester United, Chelsea, Liverpool, Arsenal, and Tottenham. Those include sit-downs with a veteran of 22 years of management in the league, Arsene Wenger, and conversations with the billionaire owners of Liverpool, John W. Henry, Arsenal, Stan Kroenke, and the famously reclusive chairman of Tottenham, Daniel Levy. We also tracked down dozens of less visible figures who were nonetheless crucial and present during major turning points in the Premier League's arc, from the signing of Cristiano Ronaldo by Manchester United, to Abramovich's acquisition of Chelsea, to the arrival of Emirati royals in Manchester. Every scene in the book is reconstructed from direct accounts and our conversations with the people who lived them. And in several cases, we were able to retell those moments because we attended them in person, as English soccer underwent its most radical upheaval in a century. Joshua Robinson and Jonathan Clegg, London, May 2018. Prologue. London, November 2017. One by one, they pulled up to the Churchill Hotel in Mayfair, in black taxicabs, chauffeur-driven town cars, and one silver Rolls-Royce. They strode into the marble-floored lobby, sidestepped the tourists wheeling too much luggage, and briskly turned left toward the private meeting room, where they were due at 10 a.m., hoping to look casual as they clocked which of their colleagues and nemesis had already arrived. These get-togethers were never simple. The last one had devolved into an argument about who contributed more to their little club, and who deserved, no, had the God-given right to make the most money. They hoped this time that they could talk to one another with a bit more civility. This was a fancy place after all. A cosmopolitan collection of millionaires, billionaires, and CEOs. They came from worlds as far apart as Wall Street, professional poker, and the greeting card business. Most of this crowd would never have had any reason to cross paths, nor did they particularly want to. They never chose one another. They barely even trusted one another, and yet here they were, on a Thursday morning in November, committed partners in the most popular live entertainment business on the planet. They were the owners, executives, and resident plutocrats of the 20 soccer clubs in the English Premier League, and they were meeting to make sure that their collective cash cow, which generates more than $5.6 billion a season, kept fattening at the same astronomical rate as it had over the past quarter century. Since 1992, the Premier League's combined revenues have increased by an obscene 2,500%. Not bad for a group of guys who mostly loathe one another. But before this summit could begin, before the suits could get down to the business of England's most successful export this side of the English language, there was another age-old British ritual they needed to endure, milling around awkwardly at a social gathering. By the hotel entrance, Liverpool Football Club's principal owner, the bespectacled hedge fund billionaire John W. Henry, was making small talk with the grey-haired former sales rep in charge of the whole show, Premier League Chief Executive Richard Scudamore. Henry was fresh in from Boston to take stock of Liverpool's revival under a German coach, whose horn-rimmed glasses, scruffy beard, and grey sweatpants meant he could easily pass for a Brooklyn dad. The team's only problem is that its owner knows plenty about winning, but in the wrong sport. Henry's other major hobby is running the Boston Red Sox. Strutting past them without so much as a buenos dias came Ferran Soriano, a Catalan former rugby player, carrying himself with the swagger of a man whose club is in the process of running away with the Premier League title. That's because Manchester City was in fact pantsing all comers, though technically it wasn't Soriano's club. He was there representing the interests of his boss, an Abu Dhabi sheikh who spent $200 million to buy the team, another $1 billion on players, attended one game in Manchester in 2010, and then never came back. But with Pep Guardiola, the sports eccentric philosopher king and self-styled genius from Barcelona running the team back in Manchester, the club was in good hands. Soriano wasn't alone on this morning. Trotting alongside him was Ivan Gazidis, a bald, Oxford-educated lawyer standing in for his own absentee boss, the Arsenal owner known as Silent Stan Kroenke, a rarely seen, never heard real estate mogul who married a Walmart heiress and now seems less interested in owning sports teams. His portfolio includes the NFL's Los Angeles Rams and the NBA's Denver Nuggets than he is in owning the buildings they play in. Those two made for a slightly awkward pairing, since Manchester City had spent most of the past decade on a personal mission to usurp Arsenal, signing away their best players and appropriating their gimmick of playing beautiful football above else. With only one minor tweak, City actually won. This had been a point of some consternation at the staid old Arsenal FC, known as the Gunners because the club was formed in 1886 by a group of blacksmiths who literally built cannons. The team's manager, a 68-year-old Frenchman with a professorial air and a PhD in late-season chokes, was desperately trying to pull off one last coup before retirement. But Arsenal's fans didn't want to give him that chance. They'd staged protests and flown airplane banners over the stadium, urging Arsene Wenger to beat it and take silent stand with him. The joke had been running for so long now that Wenger out signs had become practically de rigueur at any gathering of more than 12 people. That same week, one was spotted at an anti-Robert Mugabe protest in Zimbabwe. Soriano and Gazidis wasted no time in heading to the meeting room. Tony Bloom, the poker savant and professional gambler, took a little longer. Bloom, the owner of Brighton and Hove Albion, the seaside club whose name sounds like a Shakespearean battle cry, was briefly waylaid by a detour into the hotel restaurant to peruse their selection of cakes. By the time Bloom was ready to enter the meeting, he was joined by Steve Parish, the fast-talking, exuberantly coiffed, bespoke-suited advertising millionaire who likes to race Porsches when he isn't putting out fires at his club Crystal Palace. They entered through the thick, white double doors and moved inside, at which point Parish took a seat directly next to Bruce Buck, the chairman of Chelsea. It wasn't because the two men were particularly close, but because the league still gets its owners, these billionaires, titans of business and Type A personalities, to sit in alphabetical order, presumably to prevent any nasty cliques from forming. Parish's palace needed to pay close attention to the day's discussion of projected revenues, because he was a little short of cash right then, despite annual payouts of more than $200 million to each club. He was about to ask his business partners in New York, a pair of private equity giants, to stump up millions of dollars to spend on new players, as his team steeled itself for a battle in the second half of the season. If results kept breaking against Palace, they faced being booted from the league, meaning somebody else would be sitting next to Chelsea the following year. For Chelsea, the league's defending champions, the money would make less of a difference. The club is sometimes known as Chelsea on account of its owner, a free-spending Russian oligarch named Roman Abramovich, who is worth more than $7 billion. A fact that comes in handy when one of your expensive habits is impulsively firing managers, and then paying out handsome severance packages. Even as the meeting unfolded without him, Abramovich was weighing the fate of his operatically mannered Italian coach, who was set to become the oligarch's 12th managerial victim in 14 years. Still, Abramovich took a keen interest in the proceedings from a distance. For a forcefully discreet man, few things happen inside his team or around the league without his knowledge. During the next 2 hours, the clubs in the room thrashed out the newest terms of their most valuable source of income, the Premier League's television broadcast rights, which were heading to auction in 3 months' time. For 25 years, that sale had formed the backbone of the league's business. Its games now air in 185 countries. The United Nations recognizes only 193, and every weekend they are broadcast to a potential TV audience of 4.7 billion people. This wasn't a gathering of 20 soccer clubs. This was somewhere between a shareholders' conference and a production meeting for a reality TV show that shoots each episode with a rotating cast of 22 men before a live studio audience. So no one in the meeting batted an eyelash when Ed Woodward excused himself halfway through to take a pressing phone call. New York was on the line. As chief executive of the New York Stock Exchange-listed Manchester United, he needed to lead the first quarter earnings call with investors and financial analysts. As a former J.P. Morgan investment banker, this was right in Woodward's wheelhouse. The business of actually running a successful soccer club is a task he's less comfortable with. Woodward was terrified of upsetting Manchester United's own impulsive overlord, though he wasn't one of Woodward's direct bosses, the Florida-based billionaires who own the club. It's one of his own employees, the man he personally hired as the team's manager, an irascible Portuguese named José Mourinho, whose reputation of lifting trophies is matched only by his knack for driving opponents and club chairmen up the wall. Mourinho, of course, never attended these meetings. He was still in Manchester, where he had lived in a luxury hotel for the previous year and a half, instead of moving his family up from London. As far as that day's conference was concerned, the foremost needler of club chairmen in the room was the short, quiet man in glasses, with a stake in one of the few English soccer clubs whose nickname, the Lilywhites, may be less ridiculous than his actual name, Tottenham Hotspur. That man, Chairman Daniel Levy, drives the hardest bargain in the league. He is proven so gifted at wringing out every penny from selling players to his opponents that Tottenham could afford to tear down the stadium where it had played since 1899 and move into a new $1 billion complex situated exactly 20 yards away, with twice the capacity and a removable turf field. The goal was to accommodate NFL games on any given Sunday and provide a fitting stage for Tottenham's star player, a 24-year-old wonder boy with a silky touch and vacant expression who was being touted as the latest savior of English soccer. No one in the room knew more about how difficult Levy could be than David Gold, the co-owner of West Ham. He sat a few seats down from Levy, though he was easy to spot in the row of dark business attire. Gold was the white-haired 82-year-old who rocked up in the silver Rolls-Royce Phantom, sporting a green tartan suit, looking as if he'd stepped out of a P.G. Wodehouse novel. And that wasn't the only thing that distinguished Gold from his fellow owners. He was also the only owner in the room to make his fortune in the one form of entertainment more popular among young men than pro soccer: porno mags. By Gold's side was the lone female executive in the room, Baroness Brady of Knightsbridge, better known as Karen Brady, or by her nickname, the First Lady of Football. The West Ham vice-chairperson was among the most feared executives at the table, not just for her ruthless professionalism. She famously married one of her own players and then sold him to a rival club twice, but because she authored a weekly column in Britain's best-selling tabloid, where she routinely bad-mouthed rival Premier League executives. But on this morning, everyone seemed to be on their best behavior. They tolerated one another's presence because there was one fact they could all agree on. The Premier League wasn't merely the most watched sports league in the world. It was number one, and nothing else came remotely close. None of the people in the Churchill Hotel on that November morning were particularly responsible for any of this. But without any real genius or acumen, the motley cast of characters that created the modern Premier League in 1992 had stumbled onto the sports equivalent of the iPhone. Pretty soon, everyone, everywhere, wanted a piece. And in a remarkably short period, a small group of owners discovered the alchemy that turned aging industrial cities and obscurely named clubs into the focus of compulsive global attention. It would be generous to call too many of the outcomes in this story planned, or credit genius to many of the individuals who pulled them off. But with packed stadiums, millions of viewers around the world, and TV money pouring in, life in the Premier League today was sweeter than anyone ever imagined. Or it was in the executive's box, at least. The business realities that weigh down other industries hadn't caught up to the Premier League just yet. but the owners were starting to realize.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?